The first thing they heard was the clatter of wood against stone. In the cold light of a January morning, the people of Acoma Pueblo watched from the rim of their mesa as Spanish soldiers wrestled long ladders into place against the sheer cliff. Armor flashed in the rising sun. Below, horses stamped and snorted in the thin air, their breath turning white as it drifted upward. Smoke from cook fires on the mesa curled into the sky, mixing with the dust kicked up by boots and hooves. For generations, the Acoma had trusted this rock to keep them safe. Now they were about to find out how far the Spaniards were willing to go to prove that the Sky City was not beyond their reach. The story had started months earlier, before the ladders, before the shouting at the cliff's base. In late 1598, Juan de Oñate's expedition pushed north into what is now New Mexico, carrying royal orders and a promise of new settlements. The Spanish were hungry, cold, and far from supply lines. They leaned heavily on native communities for food and labor. When Oñate's lieutenant, Juan de Zaldivar, arrived at Acoma with a small party of men, he expected obedience. The Acoma, who had survived raids, droughts, and shifting enemies long before Spain appeared on the horizon, had their own expectations. Zaldivar and his men demanded corn, blankets, and lodging. Acoma leaders argued that their stores were limited and winter was coming. Tension built inside the crowded rooms where the negotiations took place. Witnesses later disagreed about who struck first, but they agreed on how it ended. A fight broke out, and the pueblo erupted into chaos. By the time it was over, a number of Spaniards lay dead, including Zaldivar. For the Acoma, it was a defense of their home. For Oñate, who heard the news days later at the Rio Grande, it was an insult to royal authority that could not go unanswered. Oñate ordered a punitive expedition that would make an example of Acoma. He placed Zaldivar's brother, Vicente, in command, and gave him around 70 armored soldiers, some Mexican Indian auxiliaries, and a clear directive: subdue the pueblo and punish those responsible. The force marched west across the cold plateau, following trails that had carried traders and messengers for centuries. At night, the soldiers gathered around their fires, talking about the steep rock they had been told to climb. Above them, the sky was crowded with stars. Ahead of them, a battle waited on a cliff. Acoma Pueblo rose nearly 400 feet out of the desert floor, a mesa with sheer sides and a flat top crowded with houses, kivas, and storerooms. The only practical paths up were narrow and steep, easy to defend and hard to attack in numbers. Acoma men and boys watched the approaching column from above, sending runners to alert families. Women hurried to pull children inside and secure food stores. The people had seen Spaniards before, but never in such numbers, and never with ladders and siege gear. They knew this would not be another tense visit that ended with the visitors riding away. On the first day of the assault, the Spanish tried to take the mesa by force. Soldiers advanced with ladders on their shoulders, while arquebusiers covered them from below. As the first ladder went up, Acoma defenders pushed boulders and heavy stones over the edge. The ladder snapped, spilling armored men onto the rocks. Arrows, spears, and sling stones rained down. A second ladder met the same fate. The assault stalled, leaving bodies scattered along the cliff, while the survivors dragged their wounded back to camp. For a brief moment, it looked as if the height of Acoma might hold. Vicente de Zaldivar adjusted his tactics. The next morning, his men approached from a more sheltered angle and used the terrain to protect their climb. Under covering fire, a small group managed to gain a foothold on a ledge partway up the cliff. From there, they inched higher, clinging to crevices, hacking handholds into the stone, and lifting one another by sheer force of will. Acoma fighters leaned out with poles and tried to knock them away, but a few Spaniards finally scrambled over the rim. Once that beachhead was secured, more followed. The fight shifted from the cliff face to the crowded rooms and narrow alleys of the mesa top. Inside the pueblo, the battle turned brutal. Spanish soldiers moved from house to house, firing their guns in deafening bursts that filled the rooms with smoke. Acoma men fought back with clubs, bows, and knives, attacking from rooftops and doorways. Women tried to protect their families, grabbing children and hiding them behind thick adobe walls or in storage rooms. Fires broke out as torches fell, and roofs caught flame. Smoke drifted across the mesa, mixing with dust and cries of pain. The clash went on through the day and into the next, a grinding struggle that left no corner of the Sky City untouched. By the third day, Spanish control was decisive. Many Acoma fighters lay dead, and others were too wounded or exhausted to keep resisting. Some families tried to escape down hidden paths on the far side of the mesa, but not everyone could move. Those who remained were rounded up in the open spaces between houses. The bodies of the fallen lay in collapsed rooms and along the edges of the cliffs. Later counts by observers estimated that around 800 Acoma people were killed during the fighting and the fires, including hundreds of women and children. The exact number will never be known, but the scale of the loss was undeniable. The survivors now faced judgment. Oñate had not come in person, but his orders guided what happened next. Men of fighting age were separated out, bound, and condemned to years of forced labor. In many accounts, men over 25 had one foot amputated, a permanent mark meant to cripple any future rebellion. Women and younger men were sentenced to servitude as well, assigned to Spanish households and missions throughout the region. Children were taken from their families to be raised under church supervision. Acoma Pueblo, once a crowded, organized community on the mesa, was left shattered and nearly empty. Word of the punishments spread beyond the desert. Other pueblos heard about the amputations, the enslavement, and the sheer number of deaths. Even within the Spanish world, Oñate's actions drew criticism. Years later, he would face a trial in Mexico City for his conduct, including what he had done at Acoma. He was eventually punished and exiled from New Mexico, but that outcome did little to change what the people on the mesa had already endured. For Acoma, the damage was not just physical. Families had been broken apart, traditions disrupted, and memories marked by the sight of ladders on the cliff and smoke hanging over their homes. Despite everything, Acoma did not disappear. Over time, survivors and descendants returned to the mesa and rebuilt. New homes rose on the old foundations. Ceremonies resumed in spaces that had once seen battle. Children grew up hearing stories of the massacre, of the days when Spanish armor clanged on the rock and the people fought to hold the Sky City. Visitors who stand on the mesa today can see modern buildings, ancient walls, and the same steep drop that once seemed unassailable. The air is thin and clear, and the view stretches for miles across the desert that carried both Oñate's soldiers and the Acoma runners who tried to warn of their coming. The Battle of Acoma is remembered as one of the harshest clashes of the early Spanish presence in the Southwest, a turning point that showed how far colonial power was willing to go and how dearly the people of the mesas paid for resistance. Yet the survival of Acoma Pueblo also stands as proof that even after such violence, a community can hold on to its land and identity. The scars remain, written into family histories and the stones of the mesa itself, but so does the will to endure on that high, wind-swept rock. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.